The history books state that the Civil War began at 4:30 a.m. on the morning of April 12, 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina. At that time, a signal shot was fired from one of the Confederate batteries that ringed Charleston Harbor, thus opening the bombardment of Fort Sumter, the lonely outpost of Federal troops that served as a daily reminder that the Union would not so easily be dissolved. The action upon Fort Sumter that day was, as Shakespeare would say, the argument of a fool, all full of sound and fury, yet signifying nothing. The Confederates won a demolished pile of bricks. The Union lost nothing but pride in an indefensible position. The real shockwaves were of the political kind, and they would be felt across the entire nation. The true cost of this action was to be paid out slowly over 4 long years of death, destruction, and suffering, and no state was charged a higher price than the state of Virginia. Through her quest to divide the nation, in the end she would find that the only thing divided was herself. The war began in South Carolina, but the battle began in Virginia. This is the story of the first campaign of the Civil War, sometimes known as the Forgotten Campaign. It's an ironic title, for as you'll see, this story has first events that not only affected 19th century America, their legacies are still with us today. We'll travel to these battlegrounds to see if any of those who fell are still lingering there. I invite you to come along with me as we look for history in the present, now on War Wraiths.
There is a fine line between this world and the next. The dead are all around us, slipping in and out like the memory of a faded dream. Are these dead not more alive when that dream turns into a nightmare? One that still resonates more than a century and a half beyond its end. Journey with us now in the search for answers to the stories of ghosts and legends of the American Civil War. This is War Wraiths.
Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland, where I was born in the war, one frosty morning, look away, Dixieland.
Time.
To the temporal eye, it appears as a straight line, like a single strand of a spider's web, joining 2 points. We fail to see the rest of the web, with all its lines, crisscrossing, overlapping, making more of a circle of interconnecting points, threads that tie together all that came before and all that is yet to be. While all that swirls around is hidden, occasionally we are offered a glimpse into another time, like looking through a window at a moment long since past. And then we have the legacies that are daily reminders of the paths that were laid out for us by those who blazed the trails we now tread. One such path was the American Civil War, a tumultuous event in the life of a young nation. One merely has to look around today, and the signs of its impact can be seen everywhere. Like all journeys, there is a beginning, the place where the story of firsts begins. This is the story of those firsts, beginning with the first campaign. Besides being the first campaign of the Civil War, this tale has other firsts in history that not only changed the world of the 19th century, their effects are still with us today. Our first stop on this journey takes us to the town of Grafton, West Virginia. This is ground zero for the beginning of that story, and it all starts here. Now why, you may ask, of all places, would this be where the first campaign would begin? The answer is actually quite simple. Trains, or to be more specific, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Connecting the port city of Baltimore with the Ohio Valley region and the Ohio River, this line was one of vital importance to the north, and the city of Grafton was where the western and northwestern lines converged. From here, it was a straight shot east over the Allegheny Mountains. Lose this hub, Washington's ability to move men and material from the west is seriously impacted. Now add to that mix the fact that a majority of citizens in this area of Western Virginia are anti-secession, and you have what can be considered equal parts problem and opportunity. This fact did not escape the attentions of both governments, North and South. For the North, the problem was first and foremost, keep the B&O running. This would be a challenge throughout the entire war. The opportunity they found themselves with was the chance to clear out all Confederate forces west of the Alleghenies, thus having the keys to the back door of the Shenandoah Valley in their pocket. For the South, it was the opportunity that was the most obvious, cutting off Washington from a major western supply route. The problem, however, was not so obvious. Yes, if they lost Western Virginia, Union forces would have the back door to the valley, but that is easier said than done. What they didn't anticipate was a secession that was brewing in their own state, long feeling ignored and taken advantage of by the planter class in the East. The thinking in this area towards independence from Virginia and eventual statehood was now or never. It is now late May 1861, and the country awaits the public referendum on the Articles of Secession passed by the legislature in April. It is all but a foregone conclusion what the vote will be in the eastern part of the state, but in this area, delegates have already been gathering in Wheeling, setting forth their own Articles of Secession, not from the country, but from Virginia. Thus, with the chessboard now laid before them, both sides began to align their pieces in preparation for the game that would be played. The two players that would square off against each other had no idea at the time that this would be the first of many occasions where they would lock horns over the next 2 years. For the North, we have the brilliant young Napoleon, as he would come to be known, George B. McClellan. 34 years old at the start of the war, he has been out of the service for several years now, building railroads. At the outbreak of hostilities, he has traveled east, securing overall command of all forces being recruited for the state of Ohio. He has been watching with some interest the goings-on across the Ohio River in western Virginia, and is now devising plans for the invasion and occupation of the territory. For the South, one merely has to say the name Lee, for the rest is of a legend and stature comparable to Washington himself. Only now, he is not fighting to create the nation, he fights to divide it. He will attempt to move around his pieces from Richmond and will not take the field until it is too late. With both generals looking to gain the first advantage, Grafton is the obvious choice. The convergence of the B&O Railroad along with the Northern and Beverly-Fairmont turnpikes presents a choice target for defense or attack. Nathan Bedford Forrest had a knack for simplifying complex military strategies, one of his favorites being, get there first with the most. At Grafton, we see what happens when opposing forces each win one side of that equation. The Confederates got there first, under the command of George Porterfield. Situated on the B&O Railroad just outside of town, his troops were quickly learning what kind of support they could expect from the citizens of Grafton. When learning of a large Union flag being flown over Main Street, Captain John Robinson and 200 men of the Letcher Guards decided to go into town to tear it down. As they came into town, they were met by angry mobs hurling all kinds of abuse and invective towards them. John Kamek recalled, "Practically the whole town was out in the street above us, cursing and calling us ugly names." Along with the citizens, there were many members of the Grafton Guards present, a pro-Union militia. With some effort on the part of the Confederate officers in containing their men, bloodshed was avoided, and they left town without ever taking down the U.S. flag. The day was May 22nd, 1861, the day before the referendum on secession. It is also known for another reason, and it is where we begin our stories of first, for on this day we have the first Union serviceman killed by a Confederate soldier. His name was Thornsbury Bailey Brown. He and another man from the Grafton Guards, Daniel Wilson, had been out riding in the area alerting Unionists of the pending departure of Union volunteers that would be soon on the way to Grafton. As they reached the outskirts of Grafton at a place called Prinnytown, they were challenged by 3 Confederates. Brown recognized one in the growing darkness as Daniel Knight, a local ne'er-do-well that he had once disarmed in a fight. The thought of Knight blocking his access to the road incited Brown. As he was reported to say, "Damn him, what right is he to stop us?" he drew his revolver and fired. Unfortunately, he made the worst mistake a man could ever make when performing such an action on an adversary. He missed. Granted, the shot took off Knight's right earlobe, but that was clearly not his intent. Knight quickly raised his rifle and promptly shot Brown dead off his horse. Thus he became the first United States enlisted man killed by a Confederate in the Civil War. And so our journey takes us to the National Cemetery in Grafton, final resting place of Thornsbury Brown. Established in 1867, it is the last stop for veterans from this and later wars. So here we are, we're at the gravesite of Thornbury Bailey Brown, first man killed in the American Civil War. Union volunteer, shot not very far from here. And this is his final resting spot. Now we're running out of light. It's getting a little dark and I don't know when they're gonna throw me out of here. But I brought along my little friend and we're gonna see if we can get anybody to talk to us while we're here. So we're going to go ahead and switch this on. And I got this all the way up. I don't have an extra set of speakers, so I'm going to kind of keep close to the camera. See if we can get anybody to say hello to us or anything. Bailey. Can you hear me? Bailey Brown, were you shot in the chest? Bailey Brown. I'd like to get you to talk to this thing, if you can. Seems to be there's 2 radio stations up around the low to mid 90s that it picks up on. Kind of trying to discount those. Keeping my eye out for anybody who's going to throw me out of here at the same time. Bailey. Bailey Brown. speak up if you're around here. You can hear the trains. And once again, there's literally a coal train parked right next to the cemetery here. And I'll get a shot at that for you. But that's probably one of the reasons why they put the cemetery here, was because it was one of the reasons, actually, because it's so close to the tracks and they could just bring the dead right in. Boom, bang, bury them right off the trains. Made it pretty convenient. Dead. It's those same two stations that I was telling you about that keep clicking in. Bailey, anybody, someone say the word hello. Can you say that again? Sound like actually someone did say hello. But... Okay, so what I've done is I've placed it right here on his grave marker, and hopefully, maybe if I get closer to him, he can get closer to us. Maybe not. We'll see. Bailey. Mr. Brown. Can you speak to me, Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown. Bailey Brown. It's 151 years since you were shot by that Confederate. Got anything to say? Bailey Brown. Anybody here, okay? I'll just say anybody. Anybody here that can figure out how to talk through this, please say something. Well, you know, I've used this thing a few times. Don't exactly work all the time, but this is Bailey Brown, the first man killed in the American Civil War. And we're here. He ain't talking. I don't know, you know, maybe after 150 years he finally rests in peace now. Are you resting in peace, Bailey? You got his picture up there, which I'll get a shot of it. This is not a handsome man, okay? As like most people back then, right? You were pretty butt ugly, right? I don't know what that was, but it could have been a yeah. So, yeah, this was a butt ugly dude, okay? I mean, he wasn't going to win any beauty contest. This was not John Wilkes Booth, handsome guy we're talking about here. This was, well, so... But this was the region. This was, you were out here, you were pretty much fighting every day just for your existence. So it kind of had a way of beating you down, if you will. So you didn't have much time for skincare and beauty products and metrosexual tendencies. Living was hard enough. Right, Bailey? Well, here comes some people in here, and I don't want them to think that I'm a kind of a freak or anything, so I guess that'll wrap up our little thing here at the cemetery. But this is the gravesite. This is the man who was killed, the first one killed in the war, and obviously we didn't talk to him, but, oh well, we'll keep searching.
The day after Brown was killed, Virginia approved the Articles of Secession, and on May 24th, the citizens of Western Virginia set in motion their own plans of breaking off from the rest of Virginia. The Union supporting Grafton Guards boarded a train for Wheeling to be mustered into the service as Company B, 2nd Virginia Regiment, United States. As they left, Colonel Porterfield took possession of Grafton, but it was to be short-lived, for now the Union forces were about to win the second part of Forrest's equation. They would soon get there with the most. With only about 550 men at his command, he soon got word that close to 1,000 Union troops would be moving on Grafton. Also, McClellan was getting requests from Washington to move against the Confederate forces in Western Virginia as well. Porterfield, knowing this, sent troops west to burn railroad bridges in order to slow down the advance. This had quite the opposite effect. When McClellan found this out, he sped up the plans and sent 2 full regiments across the Ohio River to secure the railroad and the town of Grafton. The situation was fast becoming untenable for Porterfield, so on May 28th, he evacuated Grafton and headed south. On May 30th, U.S. troops arrived in Grafton, securing the town and the railroad without firing a shot. Now McClellan could turn his attention to the rest of Western Virginia, starting with Porterfield's forces to the south. He would now let slip the dogs of war.
The town of Philippi sits on the banks of the Tigard Valley River. It is the seat of Barber County, and during the Civil War, this area was a hotbed of secessionist feelings. 15 miles south of Grafton, it served as a natural area of recruitment and supply for Colonel Porterfield's command. He quickly set up camp and began rallying the town and surrounding areas in hopes of increasing the size of his force. All he needed was sufficient time, something his foe would not be willing to concede so readily. On the day he arrived in Grafton, Colonel Benjamin F. Kelly, commander of the newly formed 1st Virginia Regiment, United States, was already casting his gaze south towards Philippi and Porterfield's command. On June 1st, when Brigadier General Thomas Morris arrived at Grafton, Kelly presented his plans for attack against Porterfield. Designed as a 2-pronged assault, Kelly would lead the main advance, consisting of troops from the 1st Virginia, the 9th Indiana, and the 16th Ohio. The second advance would be under the command of Colonel Ebenezer Dumont of the 7th Indiana, with elements of the 14th Ohio and 6th Indiana. The 2 columns were to move south to Philippi by 2 separate routes, with Kelly's forces taking position north of Philippi and Dumont's column moving to the south of town, thereby surrounding Porterfield and cutting off his lines of retreat. If they could pull this off, Porterfield's entire force would be lost. To ensure secrecy, they planned for the march south to be made at night. Also, to throw off any would-be spies, they threw in one more act of subterfuge. They would have the men board trains and head east, making it appear that the troops were heading for Harper's Ferry. Which brings us to the next event in our tale of firsts. This would be the first time in the history of the world that troops would be moved by train against an opposing force. On June 2nd, 1861, the plan was put into motion. The columns were boarded onto the trains, Kelly's troops leaving at 9 a.m., with Dumont's force leaving at 8:30 in the evening. Kelly's troops left the trains about 6 miles outside of Grafton, and Dumont's troops disembarked at the town of Webster, where he met up with Colonel James Steedman in the 14th Ohio. Both columns began the march to Philippi and hoped to be in position by 4 a.m. Unfortunately, the weather was about to have its say, and a hard, steady rain began to fall that would last the entire night. This would play havoc on the Union troops, as they were having to move down unfamiliar roads in the dark with a pouring rain lashing them the whole way. Soon, Dumont's troops were falling behind schedule. Meanwhile, in Philippi, the Confederates themselves were lulled into a false sense of security by the downpour and didn't even bother to put out sentries to watch the approaches to town. Big mistake. Porterfield's 800 men would soon be under attack by 3,000 Union forces, and he wouldn't know it until it was too late. At dawn, on June 3rd, 1861, cannons placed on Talbot Hill began opening fire on the Confederate camps on the opposite banks of the river. Kelly's men then began a rapid movement toward the covered bridge that crossed over the Tigard River. Porterfield's men didn't know what hit them. Being rocked out of bed by cannon and musket fire, confusion and panic soon set in, and it quickly became every man for himself. Some tried to form up and offer some kind of defense, but most just started running south out of town. This is where Dumont was to come in, cutting off the retreat. But because of the weather, he was late and in the wrong place, coming into town from the north instead of the south. It was all over in a matter of minutes.
What you're seeing here is actually way more organized than what happened. It was like going down the street, line after line, stop and firing. It was pretty much pell-mell through the streets, shoot when you can, run when you have to. So, it's a fun event, but it's not actually based in reality.
The Union forces showed 40 casualties, with almost all being minor injuries, with the exception of one. Colonel Kelly, while leading the pursuit, was shot in the chest at point-blank range by a Confederate teamster, and it was feared the wound would be mortal. Because of the surprise of the attack and the panicked Confederate retreat, this battle would come to be known as the Philippi Races. It is also known as the first land battle of the Civil War, and in its aftermath, we find another first. For one of the wounded was an 18-year-old Confederate cavalryman named James Hanger. Having just enlisted on June 2nd, he was on guard duty when the attack began on the morning of the 3rd. When he heard the opening shots, he ran to the stable where his horse was. This is what happened next in his own words. The first 2 shots were canister and directed at the cavalry camps. The 3rd shot was a 6-pound solid shot aimed at a stable in which the Churchville Cavalry Company had slept. This shot struck the ground and ricocheted, entering the stable, and struck me. He was found by Union troops 4 hours later and had his leg amputated 7 inches below the hip bone by Dr. James D. Robinson of the 16th Ohio. This would be the first of close to 60,000 amputations over the course of the war. But this would not be the last we would hear from James Hanger, for as he recovered from his wound, he soon found himself unhappy with the fit and function of the available prosthetics of the time. So he designed and made a new one for himself. Eventually, in 1863, he patented his prosthetic limb, and he soon had a contract from the state of Virginia to make limbs for other wounded soldiers. Over 150 years later, the company he founded, Hanger Incorporated, is one of the leading manufacturers of orthosis and prosthetics in the world.
After the rout of Confederate forces by Union troops at Philippi, the government in Richmond could sense that Western Virginia was slipping away.
In an effort to combat this, the powers that be in Richmond needed a qualified commander to take control of the situation. That man would be Robert S. Garnett, graduate of West Point, class of 41, veteran of the Mexican and Indian Wars, commandant of cadets at West Point. He is the most qualified officer in the Confederacy without a command. Serving as General Robert E. Lee's adjutant general since resigning his commission from the Federal Army after Virginia's secession, he is promoted to brigadier general and sent immediately from Richmond with 2 regiments to Western Virginia to shore up defenses and stop McClellan's advances.
General Garnett had 2 jobs to perform when he arrived here in Western Virginia. The first was to reorganize and strengthen the troops that were to be under his command. The second was to block the 2 vital mountain passes of the Stanton-Parkersburg Turnpike and keep them from Union control.
At around the same time, McClellan is arriving in Grafton, looking towards consolidating his gains and ridding the area of Confederate troops. Both sides knew that if the mountain passes were taken, it would be the death knell for the Confederacy in northwestern Virginia. Garnett, with only about 4,500 troops under his command, decided on placing the bulk of them at Laurel Mountain. Directly south of Philippi, it appears as the obvious place for Union troops to continue their push south. He then places the rest of his force, around 1,200 men, at Ridge Mountain to guard what is known as the Buchanan Pass. On July 6th, when Brigadier General Thomas Morris arrived in his front at Laurel Mountain with 2 regiments, it appeared that Garnett had guessed correctly.
The ridge you see behind me was where the Confederates set up their defensive positions. Having felled trees in the area a half-mile out in front of them to give a clear line of fire, they took the logs and set up log fortifications along the ridge and filled them in with earth to provide protection against rifle fire coming at them. Further up this way, they set up their artillery, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, for the position where they were. That was able to shoot down on the road to stop any movement of troops coming up. It was a pretty good defensive position, and a frontal assault against it would have been pretty tough to mount, especially with only 2 regiments. But they weren't here to do a frontal assault. They were here to hold them in place and let them think this is where the assault was going to be. Because in reality, the real force was moving from the west to the east, not against Laurel Mountain, but against Rich Mountain. This was the feint. The attack was going to be 10 miles to the southwest.
Every quality and fault you ever wanted to know about George McClellan as a commander was about to be put on display here in Western Virginia. As an organizer of armies, he was second to none. As a tactician, he was also highly competent. His plans for attacking Garnett called for sending Morris with 2 regiments towards Laurel Hill to hold the rebel force in place, while he swung around to the west with 15,000 troops to move against the much smaller force at Rich Mountain. On July 6th, Morris showed himself to Garnett at Laurel Hill, and beginning on July 7th, proceeded to openly skirmish with his forces to keep Garnett in place. By the 9th, McClellan was at Rich Mountain and got his first look at what the rebels had in store for him there. Earlier in mid-June at Rich Mountain, Garnett had ordered the placement of cannon and construction of earthworks so formidable that he was confident enough in them to remark that a regiment, quote, will be able to hold 5 times their number in check for a sufficient time to admit of being reinforced, if they will stand to their work.
The area directly behind me is where the Confederates set up what they came to call Camp Garnett in honor of their general. On the hill to my left, they placed cannons, and then lower down, from there, across the road, and to the other side, they dug rifle pits and set up earthworks and entrenchments.
On July 9th and 10th, McClellan decided to test the veracity of Garnett's statement, attacking with 3 brigades. Garnett's belief, like the camp that bore his name, was not found to be lacking. This left McClellan with 2 options: all-out frontal assault on Camp Garnett, or find another way. That other way came walking into his camp on July 10th. His name was David Hart, great-grandson of one of the original signers of the Declaration of Independence, who was a staunch Unionist, and his parents owned the house that sat atop Rich Mountain.
Brought before Brigadier General William S. Rosecrans, Hart told of a way around the Confederate left flank, up to the top of Rich Mountain, where one could find himself in the enemy's rear. After conferring with McClellan, the plan was put into motion. Rosecrans would take 2,000 men, follow the route, and attack the small force, if any, at the top of Rich Mountain. He would then push down towards Camp Garnett, while McClellan was attacking from the front. At 4 a.m. on the morning of July 11th, Rosecrans departed.
In the Confederate camp, Lieutenant Colonel John Pegram, newly arrived and now in command, got word of a possible movement against his right flank. To prevent this, he sent 300 men and 1 cannon to the top of Rich Mountain. They were to face to the north to stop such an attack from turning his flank. At 2 p.m., all hell broke loose on Rich Mountain.
What you see behind me is just about the entirety of the Rich Mountain battlefield.
Into this tight little space came crashing the 2,000 boys from Indiana and Ohio, striking down like a thunderbolt from a clear blue sky. The 300 Confederate troops, who had originally started out in a line facing to the north, now had the reverse field, under fire, and faced towards the south to absorb the attack that was now upon them.
The white sign down there marks the spot where the single cannon that the Confederates had at their disposal was set up and firing into the troops. With 2,000 against only 310, the fact that this battle lasted close to 2 hours is a miracle in itself.
Overwhelmed, the rebels fell back, eventually giving up the field entirely. Back at Camp Garnett, Pegram soon got word of what was happening up top, tried to send some help up the mountain, but he was too late. All this time, McClellan was supposed to be attacking Pegram, holding him in place. Where was he? Where was he? Sitting in his tent, inventing reasons why he shouldn't push forward and attack. This is McClellan at his worst. So afraid of failure that even when numbers, odds, and surprise are on his side, he still can talk himself out of action. By nightfall, Rosecrans holds the top of the mountain, and the Confederates are withdrawing under cover of rain and darkness.
At this boulder that's here behind me, quite a few Confederates fought and died. As you can see, from here and going up the hill, there's many more, but this one specifically, quite a few took shelter behind, and more than 1 or 2 died. As we go searching tonight for the ghosts of Rich Mountain, this is the place to be. And this is where we will spend tonight.
When one thinks of the ghosts of the Civil War, the mind is drawn instinctively to the town and fields of Gettysburg, or the old great southern plantation houses and slave quarters, maybe the old stone forts that dot the coastline, and of course other great battlefields where thousands fought and died. But what of a quiet little field that sits atop a lonely mountain, where a little battle raged for only a couple of hours, and where no great roster of the dead was compiled? Even in a place like this, one so insignificant that it barely ever rates a mention, even in some of the greatest tomes ever written on the subject of the American Civil War. Is it possible, even in a place like this, that the spirits of those who fought and died here can still be found to inhabit the site where life for them came to its abrupt and bitter conclusion? Even in a place like this?
Okay. So here we are. We're on the Rich Mountain battlefield. Right about the area where Henry Clay Jackson was shot. As I told you before, he had made the boast that he was gonna kill a damn Yankee and cut out his heart and roast it, okay? Well, he was probably right in about this area here, or right about where I'm standing. Of course, during the first volley, when they came, the Federals came over the mountain, which is to our south, going this way. North is, of course, straight out that way. He was struck in the throat and died right here before he could even get one shot off. So what we're going to try and do tonight is see if we can make some contact with him, or if there's anybody else who's out here on this battlefield. Now over here I've set up a Maglite flashlight, which we'll see if we can get it to turn on and off by itself. See if anybody's out here that could make that flashlight go on and off. Now I'll tell you, when I was setting it up, it started going on and off by itself. Now whether it was because it was too close to the on-off point, or if it was because somebody was already manipulating it, we don't know. But we're here to find out. And also there's a raging full moon coming up right over to our east right here. Occasionally you'll probably see a car go by, because right behind us here is the Stanton-Parkersburg Turnpike, which cut across the mountain, which made this such a key point in the lines of travel, lines of communication, lines of supply from regular Virginia over here into what they used to call either Western Virginia or Trans-Allegheny Virginia. Matter of fact, here comes a car right now. So as you can see, and you'll see right how close we are when this car goes by. So yeah, we're pretty close to the road here. So, and the flashlight has already come on by itself over here. It's not very bright. I don't know if you see that. I'm gonna go ahead and come into it with my handheld camera right here, and we'll see if we can get this to work a little of its magic for us. Oh, it went off already. So let's see. Do you hear me asking you these questions? If so, please turn on, not that one, the other flashlight. Can you turn on the other flashlight, if you understand what I'm saying? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, could you turn it off now? The other way. You have to move it the other way to turn it off. Turn the flashlight on the right-hand side the other direction, and it'll go off. Can you turn it off for me? If you can hear me, please turn the flashlight on the right off. Thank you. Okay. Remember, these will be yes and no questions. I guess that's all I can really ask you. Yes and no questions. The flashlight on the right is yes. Flashlight on the left is no. Okay, you understand? Oh, now you got both of them on. Yes and no. Correct. Correct. The one on the right is yes. Turn it off. The flashlight on the right-hand side. Correct? No, off. Well, you turn them both off. Okay. Well, we'll give this a shot. As you can see, maybe it doesn't go exactly the way we want, but they're coming on and off by themselves, so at least that's something. That's a start. So we'll see if we can get, the further we go, if we can get a better response going here. So. Am I talking to the people who fought here in July of 1861? The answer is yes. Turn the flashlight on the right on. Did you fight here at the Battle of Rich Mountain? Well, that's pushing it as a no. We're trying to. Were you involved in the Battle of Rich Mountain? That's a no, correct? Are you telling me no? That's the left-hand flashlight that you keep twisting on and off. Battle of Rich Mountain. Did you fight at the Battle of Rich Mountain? No. Well, that's what I'm looking for. People who fought at the Battle of Rich Mountain. Are they here? Yes or no? The people who died here. Are there any Confederate soldiers with me now? That's the left. That means no. Do you know that? Do you know which flashlight you're turning on? How about the other one? Can you turn the other one on? Okay. Turn the one on the right off. Maybe we'll go yes and no with that one. Turn the one on the right-hand side off. Turn the one on the right off. Please. Okay. If you were a soldier in the Confederate States Army, can you turn the flashlight on the right-hand side on? If you were a member of the Hart family that lived up on the top of this mountain, can you turn the flashlight on the right-hand side on? If you were a soldier in the Union Army, can you turn the flashlight on the right-hand side on? If you had nothing to do with the Civil War, and are just up here right now, turn the flashlight on the right-hand side on. Okay. You had nothing to do with the Civil War. You're kind of killing me here right now. You know that, right? Turn the flashlight off. Okay. So now, the flashlight on the right comes on. So that's on and it's on bright. Now the one on the left keeps flicking on and off, so maybe they're just screwing around. I don't know. All right, you guys just keep playing with the flashlights. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the dowsing rods. And we'll see if we can get any intelligent answers with those. So here we go with that. Over the river and through the woods. Okay. So what I got here, as you can see, dowsing rods, which are like flopping all over the place. So we're gonna, I guess I'll get right about here, and hopefully you can see how these suckers work. Okay. If there are any members of the Confederacy, also known as the Confederate States of America, militia and or armed forces here, whether belonging to a state or the country, can you please cross these rods in front of me? Make an X with them. Make an X. Okay. Straighten them back out, please. These are going pretty good right now, actually. These are going a little better than I thought they would. Try and get over here to the side so you can see these things, okay? Point straight at that camera in front of me, both of them. Excellent. So you know, if you know what a camera is, move the rod in my right hand to the right. Okay? Bring it back to center. Bring the rod back to center. Bring it back. Bring it back. Thank you. Okay. We'll ask a series of questions. Okay? If the answer is yes, you will move both rods to my right. Can you do that? Both rods. Okay, bring it back to center. Bring them back. If the answer is no, I'll ask you to please
cross the rods in front of me. Can you do that? Cross the rods? Excellent. Okay. Center them, please. You guys are pretty strong out here. Okay. First, we'll start with who we're talking to. Are there any members of the Upshur Greys here? Upshur Greys. Okay. Back to the center, please. Back to the center. Henry Clay Jackson, are you here right now? Can you hear me? Henry Clay Jackson, are you here? Remember. Okay, hold on a second. If the answer is yes, I'll need you to move them a little further just to show, thank you. Okay, Henry Clay, you can hear me, right? Can you hear me, Henry? Thank you. Are there any members of the 20th Virginia here? Remember, X for no, to the right for yes, and to the right. More to the right, if it's yes. Thank you. Straighten it back up. The 25th Virginia, are you represented here right now? Do you have members here that can hear me right now? Thank you. Back straight. Okay. Am I standing in the position you were at when the Yankees came over the hill to the south? Is this where you were at? Okay. I have read that there were about 312 Confederates here in force during the battle. Is that true? 312? Okay. Straighten it back up. Thank you. No? 300. Is 312 an accurate number for how many there were? Okay. Remember, both rods, gentlemen. If you please, both rods. To the right. Thank you. I have read that there were 1,917 Yankee forces that came over that hill. Would that be accurate? No? Wait, straighten them back up. Straighten them back up. Okay, hold on. Now this is me trying to regain center position here. Okay. Gentlemen. Are you with me now, gentlemen? Can you hear me? Okay. They said there was 1,917 Yankee forces that came over that hill. Would that be accurate? Okay. I've read the battle lasted 2 hours. Is that accurate? About 2 hours, give or take. Okay. Thank you. Straighten back up, please. One in my left hand needs to move back. Move back, please. Move it back for me. Thank you. I really hope this is showing up against me because I'm pretty bright here, so on this camera. Okay. I'm going to I've read that the figures given for Confederate casualties was around 80 wounded and killed. Would that be correct? Wounded and killed 80? Okay. No one has given me an exact number of how many were killed here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start counting from 1. When I reach the number of Confederates that were killed during the battle only, could you please cross the rods for me when I hit the right number? Can you do that for me? Okay. Beginning now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 26, 26 killed during the battle? Really? Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to turn down the gain on this just a little bit. There, that's better. Okay, so as you can see, here we are here with our rods. Okay, get him back to center, gentlemen. Center him back up. Okay. So 26 were killed here. That would mean 54 were wounded, or about that. I'd like to ask you now about, is his name Charles Cox? Do you know Charles Cox? Okay. Charles Cox, was he left in the woods on this mountain by retreating Confederates? Yes. Can you point in the general direction of where he was left? Sounded like someone was walking up behind me. Over there? Is there someone walking over there? Is it someone from your time or my time? Your time? Okay. Spooked me a little bit. You understand, right? Getting spooked a little bit? Okay. So Charles, is that his name, Charles Cox? Am I saying that right? Okay. And he was left in which direction again? Point to where he was left at again, please. Point to where Charles was. Where was Charles? Over there. Okay. No one ever knows what became of him, correct? As far as I know. You're not sure? Did Charles die in these woods? Did he die from his wounds? Is that why nobody knows what happened to him? Okay. You're saying yes to that, correct? Yes? Okay. Alright, I'm going to pull out the radio now. We're going to go ahead and close this rod session. Once again, I thank you for talking to me, and we'll see what we can get with the other thing. So, here we go.
The price of victory is sacrifice.
Wondering if you know what my name is. Can you say my name? That sounded like Christian right there. I'll have to listen to that again, but it sounded like my name. Can you say my name? Can you say my name? What's the name of this state that we're in right now? Can you tell me what state this is? I just heard West Virginia. I literally just heard West Virginia. What's the name of this state that we're in right now? Can you tell me what state this is? Now, whether that comes out on tape or not, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I just heard West Virginia. What was your commanding general's name? What was your commanding general's name? What was your commanding general's name? That almost sounded like Garnett, who was the commanding general. I gotta look at this on the tape, because, I mean, it's, you know, it's da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's kind of hard to tell, but I might be getting some stuff here. I slowed down the sweep rate just to try a little different thing here. What's the name of the town just to the east of us? Once again, what is the name of the town just to the east of us? Once again, what is the name of the town just to the east of us? Almost sounded like Beverly, but I'm not really sure on that one. Well, oh yeah, there we go. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and kill this, I guess. About a 15-minute session there we just did.
What the increase of UFO sightings?
Get exactly what we were looking for, but I don't know, there might be something in there. I'll go to the tape and we'll look through it. We might have something good there. So, on that note, I believe that we're going to call it a night here at Rich Mountain. Some things were good, some things didn't happen. So, 2 nights out here, we got a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So, flashlights definitely will come on and off out here, without a doubt. That's a given. As far as getting other stuff going on out here, maybe not what as a ghost hunter you'd like to see, but you know, these aren't trained animals out here. These are, you know, they do what they want, just like when they were human, just like now. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this, and we're going to continue our journey through the first campaign and finish this story.
During the night of July 11th, 1861,
control of northwestern Virginia was irrevocably shifted to the Union. Pegram's forces were giving up Rich Mountain, and now, back at Laurel Mountain, Garnett was in the process of pulling out of his defensive position under the cover of darkness. Having been informed by scouts that Union troops were already in Beverly, he would instead be moving to the northeast in an effort to reach the Northern Turnpike and a little crossroads called Red House in Maryland. If he could make it, he could safely get his forces back across the Allegheny Mountains. What he didn't know was that his scouts were wrong. The troops they saw in Beverly were not Union but Confederate, for McClellan was still at Rich Mountain. This would prove to be a fatal error. With the coming of dawn on July 12th, the curtain now rose on the final act of the first campaign. At Rich Mountain, Rosecrans decided to push down to Camp Garnett. Arriving there, he found it deserted, save for a few wounded and sick. Seeing it empty, he sent word forward to McClellan to alert him to the situation. Astonished at the news, McClellan immediately rode up to Camp Garnett to see it for himself. And thus began the single greatest PR campaign in the history of the Civil War, and another in our story of firsts. The dawning of the age of electronic communications by an army in the field. Being a railroad man, McClellan knew the value of the telegraph as a communication tool. So as he began his march to Rich Mountain, he had the telegraph brought along with him. Now, as he stood in the abandoned camp at the foot of Rich Mountain, he started firing off dispatches to Washington, heralding his own success. The ingenuity and newness of this endeavor was not lost on the people of the day. A Confederate prisoner at Camp Garnett was heard to exclaim, "My God, here's the telegraph!" In Washington, the amazement was no less. The first telegraph sent from Rich Mountain read, "We are in possession of all the enemy's works up to a point in sight of Beverly. Have taken all his guns, a very large amount of wagons, tents, etc. Everything he had. A large number of prisoners, many killed. Mass of enemy escaped through the woods entirely disorganized. Our success complete and almost bloodless." Later that day, McClellan entered Beverly and immediately went to work setting up a telegraph office that was hot linked to Washington. Once up and running, the wires came alive with the tales of great Ulysses, or in this case, the great McClellan. The man knew how to promote himself, almost to a fault. While all this was going on, Garnett was on the move. Back at Laurel Mountain, General Thomas Morse didn't find out Garnett was gone until midday. With a 12-hour head start for Garnett, Morse knew he had to act fast. Gathering together around 1,800 men, he put them under the command of Captain Henry W. Benham. Being a captain in a regular army, he outranked all the militia colonels. With orders to pack light and move quick, he was soon on the trail of the much slower moving Garnett. Finally, on July 13th, at a place just outside of present-day Parsons, West Virginia, called Kaler's Ford, he caught up with Garnett. Shaver's Fork is a tributary of the Cheat River, and Garnett had to cross it at three places, the first being Kaler's Ford, and the last two, both called Corrick's Ford. A running battle now ensued, with elements of the 1st Georgia, 37th and 31st Virginia battling against the 7th and 9th Indiana and 14th Ohio. Hearing this battle erupting, Garnett rode back to the ford. Colonel William Tolliver in the 23rd Virginia, along with part of the Danville artillery, took up a position along an 80-foot bluff that overlooked Corrick's Ford. Fighting ensued for 30 minutes. At this point, Garnett met up with Tolliver, instructing him where to place 10 sharpshooters to cover his retreat. With bullets whizzing by, Tolliver urged Garnett to fall back. His reply was simple: "The post of danger is now my post of duty." Tolliver was now ordered to fall back. Garnett remained at the crossing, sitting atop his horse. With his sharpshooters under cover, he was the only visible and therefore most obvious target. Turning in his saddle to order his skirmishers to retreat, a bullet struck him in the back. The Union riflemen rushed across the river and found him laying amongst the wildflowers on his back, his life quickly ebbing away. And so we come to the last of our firsts of the first campaign. The first death of a general officer of the Civil War. Robert S. Garnett, lifelong military man, son of Virginia, star-crossed to the end, shot off his horse at the end of a ridiculous battle at a ridiculous place in a ridiculous war. He would be the first of many generals on both sides to die in this tragic war. The first campaign was officially over. McClellan was now in Beverly, touting his success as a general in Western Virginia. With the disaster of First Bull Run about to take place, and because of his ability at self-promotion and the victories in West Virginia to seemingly back them up, he would soon find himself tapped to be overall commander of Union forces. General William S. Rosecrans, the real hero of the Battle of Rich Mountain, would eventually rise to Major General and lead the Army of the Cumberland to its greatest victory at Stones River in Tennessee and its greatest defeat at Chickamauga in Georgia later that same year. David Hart, the young man who led Rosecrans to the top of Rich Mountain, decided afterwards to join up with the 10th Indiana Regiment. He served with them as their commissary sergeant until March of 1862, when disease took his life near Nashville, Tennessee. Colonel Benjamin Kelly, shot in the chest at Philippi, would make a miraculous recovery from his wound, and 60 days later, be back in service, now as a brigadier general, and he would serve till the end of the war. General Robert E. Lee would finally come to Western Virginia in late July of 1861. Beset by constant raids and subordinate officers more interested in fighting each other than the Federals, he would soon be back in Richmond, where 9 months later, Destiny and George McClellan would find him waiting. As for Western Virginia, while the war here would not be over, the time spent as part of Virginia would be. The secession movement set forth in May of 1861 would come to fruition in June of 1863, when West Virginia was officially named the 35th state. The war started to create a new country, in the end only created a new state. Whitelaw Reid, at the time a reporter with the Cincinnati Daily Gazette, traveled with the Ohio troops during this first campaign. Writing about the battle at Cork's Ford, his words seemed at once to encompass not only the battle he just witnessed, but the entire war that was still yet to come. The first object that caught the eye was a large iron rifled cannon, a 6-pounder, which they had left in their precipitate flight. The Star-Spangled Banner of one of our regiments floated over. Around was a sickening sight. Along the brink of that bluff lay 10 bodies, stiffening in their own gore, and every contortion which their death anguish had produced. Others were gasping in the last agonies, and still others were writhing with horrible but not mortal wounds, surrounded by the soldiers whom they really believed to be about to plunge the bayonets to their hearts. Never before had I so ghastly a realization of the hard nature of this fraternal struggle. These men were all Americans, men whom we had once been proud to claim as countrymen, some of them natives of our own northern states. One poor fellow was shot through the bowels. The ground was soaked with his blood. I stopped and asked him if anything could be done to make him more comfortable. He only whispered, "I'm so cold." He lingered for nearly an hour in terrible agony. Another, young and just developing into vigorous manhood, had been shot through the head by a large minie-ball. The skull was shockingly fractured. His brains were protruding from the bullet hole and lay spread on the grass by his head. And he was still living. I knelt by his side and moistened his lips with water from my canteen, and an officer who came up a moment afterward poured a few drops of brandy from his pocket flask into his mouth. God help us. What more could we do?
Weeping, sad and lonely, my hopes and fears in vain. When this cruel war is over, praying that we meet again.